In 1967, three women were driving home after a much-needed night out. While the women were driving down Highway 78, they noticed a very bright red object in the sky. This object was very strange, and the women were trying to figure out what it was. One of them was convinced that it was an airplane on fire, and it was about to crash. But after watching it for quite some time, they realized that this object couldn't have been an airplane, especially one on fire. Then this fiery object started to get closer and closer until it was right next to them, and the woman believed that this craft was able to take control of their car, as it somehow started to drive on its own, and it started to go faster. Now the women were screaming their heads off, trying to get their car to slow down. Then the car started to fill up with a very strange fog-like substance, and the woman got very dizzy and they all passed out. Now when they woke up, they were very happy because they were still alive, as they thought for sure that they were going to die. But of course, they were still very confused and very stressed out, and when they got home they called the police. Now the police were at a loss for words. They thought that maybe these women had a little too much to drink. Now since the police were no help, they decided to call the Navy, and the Navy was just as shocked as the police, and they too couldn't offer any assistance. Now these three women were driven. They wanted answers, and they called every government agency that they could find, in hopes that maybe one of them might just be able to explain what happened to them that night. Eventually, a TV station heard about the story, and this encounter did make headline news. And of course, not too many people believed them. But they wanted the world to know that they weren't lying, they were telling the truth. So they all took lie detector tests, and they all passed with flying colors. They even went under hypnosis, and while being hypnotized, they all revealed the exact same terrifying encounter. And not to mention that they had the burns and scars to prove it, making this a very interesting case. One night, a man known as Sergeant Moody was watching a meteor shower in New Mexico. He was having a great time when all of a sudden a UFO landed right in front of his car. Now the sergeant was scared to death, and he tried to get out of there as fast as he could. But his car wouldn't start, and that's about all he can remember before he blacked out. But he did remember seeing a very odd alien creature within this UFO. Now the sergeant lost a lot of time that night, and he really wanted to get to the bottom of this. So he went to a hypnotist to see if they could uncover anything. And while under hypnosis, the sergeant revealed that a couple of alien beings walked right up to his car and they tried to abduct him. But the sergeant was not going out without a fight. The first thing he did was slam the door on one of them, then he started to punch the others. But sadly, that wasn't enough, and the aliens grabbed him and they took him back to their craft. Now while in the craft, these aliens ran all sorts of tests on him before they let him go. Now of course the sergeant and the hypnotist were amazed at what they uncovered, and this alien abduction got very famous very fast. Another very bizarre case comes from two young men that were abducted while working at a summer camp. The teenagers were on the docks when they spotted a UFO in the sky. Then this UFO got really close, and the teenagers could see otherworldly beings inside. Then they were hit by a beam of light and they blacked out. And when they woke up, they were surrounded by some very weird alien beings. These aliens didn't have any ears or any lips, just eyes, very small noses, and webbed fingers. Now these beings told the teenagers telepathically that they want a world peace for our planet. Then they blacked out again and woke up back on the docks. Now the teenagers told everybody what happened to them and about the message that they received, but of course, very few believed them. But what's really interesting about this abduction is there were a lot of UFO sightings being reported that night in that exact area. In 1958, two men from Scotland joined the military, and they were just starting basic training. They were assigned to guard a small hilltop, and the first thing they had to do was dig a trench. And while they were digging, they started to hear some very odd gurgling noises in the trees behind them. Now this noise was so strange that the men abandoned their position to go see what or who was making these strange sounds. As the men were trying to figure out where this noise was coming from, they started to hear what sounded like very loud footsteps behind them, and when they turned around, they saw two giant human-like beings emerge from the trees, and these huge beings were walking right towards them. Now the men didn't want to stick around to say hello. They went into panic mode, and they ran away as fast as they could. Now as the men were running, one of them looked back and noticed a very large disc in the sky, and this disc seemed to be following them. Then this UFO flew right over their heads and disappeared in the sky. And when these men got back to civilization, they told their captain and the world what they saw, making this a very strange alien encounter. Another very similar case happened in England in 1978. The Swab family was driving home after attending a very nice family get-together. It was about 11 p.m. and the family just passed the legendary Stonehenge, when all of a sudden they saw a huge 10 to 15 foot human-like being standing right in the middle of the road. Now the Swab family slammed on their brakes and watched in amazement. They were in shock. They couldn't believe what they were looking at. Then a huge bright light came down from the sky, and this light surrounded this huge being. Now the Swab family was able to see this giant in all its glory, and it looked exactly like a human, with the exception of its size, of course. And they also noticed that it was wearing a very odd gray outfit. Then a very loud humming noise started to come from the sky, and this giant slowly began to rise within this beam of light. Then the family noticed that there was a huge UFO right above them, and as quickly as it came, it was gone, and so was the giant. Now, since the sighting happened right next to Stonehenge, makes this a very interesting sighting, as many truly believe that giants built Stonehenge, as well as many other amazing monuments, such as the pyramids. Now this next one, I find very interesting. There's a volcano in Mexico that is notorious for UFO and giant sightings. And not that long ago, a mountain rescue team claimed that while on duty, they witnessed giant human-like beings climbing the slopes of this volcano faster than humanly possible. The mountain rescue team said that these beings were extremely thin, naked, and at least 10 to 50 feet tall. One of the witnesses stated that one of these beings climbed up a glacier in less than 5 minutes, which is pretty amazing since it takes a professional at least 3 to 4 hours. Now the mountain rescue team followed these giants in hopes that they could catch up with them. But that was just not going to happen because they were just way too fast. But they were able to analyze their huge footprints. Now these footprints didn't really look human, and it seemed that they had a claw, kind of like how a bird would, which would explain how they were able to climb so fast. Now what's really amazing about this sighting is not just the fact that it comes from very credible people, but over the years, a lot of people have come forward swearing that they too saw giant people either entering or leaving this volcano, and they believe that these huge creatures come from these UFOs. Now this case is really interesting, and I will be sure to keep a close eye on it, and I will keep you guys updated. Until next time, this is Paranormal Junkie. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and stay tuned.